Did you know that most Americans are forced to retire early? A little bit more than you might actually realize. So, this week on the podcast, we're going to talk about some things to think about, some things to maybe do if you are in this situation here on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist Phil Putney. Now, let's get rolling with today's show. Hey everybody, welcome into the podcast. Thanks for hanging out with Phil and I as we talk about, being forced to retire early. Are you ready? Phil, this catches a lot of people off guard, maybe more than people realize.
Yep.
So we'll talk about that this week. How you doing?
Doing good.
Good.
Getting close to Christmas, so
that's true.
That time of year, not a good time. Year, so
not a good time for this to happen.
Exactly, not a good time for this discussion, but
well,
hopefully this isn't happening to you this time of year.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let me set the synopsis up a little bit for folks just so they can kind of, because again, the concept here is it's not just, look, you can have your plan and people want to retire early, but this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about unexpected health issues, job change, downsize, whatever. The Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies, that's a mouthful, finds that most Americans retire earlier than expected by 60%. 60% of people retire sooner than they expected, right? And the median age being 62. That kind of surprised
me. So
right? That's exactly. So I was going to ask you.
That's a big number. So
do you see something like that in your practice? Somebody comes in, schedules an appointment, and it's like, hey, I got some bad news and I need to find out how I'm doing, or am I going to be okay?
Yeah, I mean, it's not 60%, but I have had that for sure. And I've even had clients that we've already done the planning for, anticipating retirement maybe 2, 3, 4 years down the road. And then they'll get this kind of news. They get, most common is going to be a layoff. Companies doing some downsizing or right sizing, whatever you want to call it. So they end up losing their position. So having that plan ahead of time, at least for those clients, is a much easier discussion because when we do our planning process, that's actually one of the scenarios we run is, well, what's the earliest you could retire?
Well, that's the beauty of working with an advisor, right? I mean, is finding that. Part of that is saying, hey, just in case something bad happens, would we be good, right? It's not just, I'm going to work till I'm 65 and everything's got to go perfect, but it's also what could happen if stuff hits the fan.
Correct. And just giving them that option, because that a lot of times people don't think that they can retire. Now let's just see if this works, and then you run the math and go through the scenarios with them. And one of my favorite parts is in that scenario saying, well, yeah, actually you could retire right now if you wanted, and I've had several clients that, we've gone through that with that. Yeah, it's really a good feeling because it gives them a whole new perspective now on work, especially if they're in a stressful position and they're like, oh, I just don't know if I can do this. Knowing that, okay, well, if things get too bad, turn your notice in, you're done. It'll work. So, yeah.
Well, let's go through a couple of things. So, I mean, obviously, why do Americans retire earlier than planned? Obviously in the Motor City area, you mentioned that, a lot of times it can be layoffs.
Yep.
Disability, right? That could be another one.
Could be a health reason, disability, that unfortunately you just can't continue to work at that point. I mean, if it's disability, that brings up a whole nother scenario that you potentially might qualify for Social Security disability. So it might help kind of bridge that gap a little bit, and make that retiring early decision a little bit easier. But I mean, that's if not to get way off track, but that is not an easy process to go through. Let's just put it that way. It unfortunately is one of those where Social Security Administration typically is going to deny the application at least once. So I mean, it's going to be an ongoing process to get this approved. Generally, now granted, if you do end up getting it approved, they do back pay you back to when you applied. But
right.
That doesn't help with the money in the bank today because you got to get there. So
yeah. Well, speaking of that, so let's talk about this financial impact, right? So obviously that puts a different strain on how you were planning on using Social Security, for example, in your strategy, right? So.
Yeah, so Social Security is one of those decisions of, perfect world where you retired, let's say at full retirement, and you were planning on taking Social Security then, or maybe even waiting till 70, or one of the spouses waiting till 70.
Right.
Now if you end up in this scenario early, does it make sense maybe to file for Social Security earlier than that?
Well, the
And again,
median,
you really have to run the numbers to see,
yeah.
does it make sense at that stage? So,
Well, the median age based on that study, by the way, Phil, is 62, right?
okay.
So you're taking it
So
early.
they would be eligible at that point. But I mean, there are clients that I've seen where it happens before even that. So if you're, let's say it happens at 60, well, now you're not even eligible for Social Security yet. So now it's even a different discussion. But yeah, to your point, if you do take Social Security early, it can be a 30% haircut, depending on full retirement age. So that's a big decision. I mean, it's not something just to go into lightly to say, oh, I'm retired now, I'm going to take Social Security early. You have to run that math out to see, well, is that still the right decision? Or does it make more sense maybe to delay it and then use other resources?
And then the health coverage gap becomes a really big piece of
Yes.
how this could totally derail and blow everything up, especially
Yeah.
if it is 62 as a median age. You got
Yep.
3 years before you can get to Medicare.
Yeah, so I mean that is probably one of the biggest factors. Even in so I had the discussion on clients being able to retire early, or if they're pre-65. I mean that's a huge expense. So it's not uncommon for a couple that are is in their 60s, not yet eligible for Medicare, to pay 1,500 to 1,800 a month or more just for, and we're not talking premium coverage here. We're talking you still have a significant out of pocket that you have to pay if something happens. So that's a huge number compared to when you hit Medicare. You know, for next year, Medicare Part B is 185. Add a supplement into that, it might be another 100 to two, depending on what you get in drugs. So you're all in two to maybe 3 to 4 per person, much different number, so, half to two-thirds less. So, yeah, so healthcare is one of those big factors that you have to look at. Now, granted, it's a short period, right? So it's only 2 to 3 years, hopefully, if it's at 60, 62. But
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So then how can we prepare, Phil, for something that's unexpected? Right. So the point being, I unexpectedly got a health diagnosis or I unexpectedly got laid off. How do you prepare for the unexpected? Well, you got to get in and see somebody. And I think
yes,
it follows that question back up with really, so what's an appropriate age to get in there and start talking with somebody about planning?
I mean, I would say 5 years out from retirement, is a great time to start, if not even a little earlier. Gives you more time, more of a runway to maybe even make some changes from a tax positioning standpoint. And I mean, this should be part of that discussion to say, okay, well, my plan is to retire at this age, but let's say something happens now. What does it look like? Um, what happens if something happens from either of you passes away? I mean, that's another scenario, not just the disability that you have to look at, which is part of the planning process for us. So, what is that? We call it our stress tests on the plan to see kind of worst case scenario, what does that look like? So it's always good to have that plan laid out ahead of time because it'll, hopefully answer the question, well, can you retire in 5 years? And maybe you can retire even earlier if you want. And then now at least you've got the plan in place, the groundwork is there so that if this decision or this scenario comes up, you're not in a panic saying, I haven't even thought about this. And, I've got to, here's the notice and I have to let them know, by next Tuesday if I'm going to take this offer or not. So it's like, yeah, you're in a panic. Now you got to try to find an advisor. They've got to go. I mean, so it can be an involved process to get you the right answer up front. So,
Well, start talking to somebody. So a couple of things, make sure, and these are the fundamentals, folks. We talk about till we're blue in the face, but make sure you've got your emergency fund,
yep.
right? Make sure that are you maxing out? Is your employee contributions? Are you getting as much as you can get several years ahead of maybe
Right.
something happening, maybe a layoff, maybe an early retirement, whatever? Are you, doing some of those little things that wind up being big things down the road?
And that really is having that plan in place to know, what are your options later. To your point, the more you save now, it just opens up those options later. So you planting a tree, when's the best time? Well, it's now, but whenever you can. But the sooner you can do that, the better. Same thing with saving for retirement. I mean, the the more you put away today, the better off you're going to be long term. And that applies no matter what your age is. I know a lot of people, unfortunately, with life events, you have the kids and they're expensive growing up, and then you got college, and once they're through college, now you're thinking, okay, now I can start saving for retirement. Where that really needs to be a decision way before that, where you're putting money away early on, because if you delay it, it's going to take you'll never catch up, right? You don't need as much up front because you've got that longer runway. So same thing here. The more you can put away earlier just helps prepare for this in the event that it does happen. Or if it doesn't, maybe you can retire earlier than you had originally anticipated. So it's always a good option to have. So.
The Tax Smart Retiree is your comprehensive guide to mastering tax efficiency for a flourishing retirement. You will find indispensable advice and actionable strategies designed to enhance tax savings, maximize Social Security benefits, protect against market volatility, and develop a customized retirement plan. To get your free ebook, click the link in the show notes of today's episode and download your copy of the Tax Smart Retiree right now.
Oh yeah, I mean, the sooner you can do any of this stuff, right? Again, emergency fund, making sure that your portfolio is properly diversified,
Yep.
Maxing out those contributions, having a plan, having a strategy.
Yep.
Now, interesting enough, Phil, based on this study, they found that 9 out of 10 retirees, despite challenges, considered themselves generally happy. That's awesome to hear, right? So even if you kind of have to go into retirement a bit early, there's a good chance that you'll find some happiness in there as well. So I think humans are very adaptable in that way.
Sure.
But nobody wants to kind of, go in under the 8 ball,
Right.
So again, strategize.
Yeah, no one likes to be caught off guard, so
Sure.
it's always better to have at least kind of that forethought to see, does this work and what's my flexibility, versus all of a sudden getting caught off guard and not knowing if it's going to work. And now you have to make some very hard financial decisions at that point. So,
well, because people will do that, right?
Yep.
They'll say, well, I'll just cut back on my lifestyle a little bit and it won't be so bad. And that's fine. You can certainly do that. And you may not have a choice to do that. But if you kind of start working ahead of those financial constraints showing up, then maybe you stave some of that off.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, when we're planning, our goal is always to maintain current lifestyle. Even if somebody, because I'll have clients sometimes that'll say, well, yeah, they're netting 10,000 a month today, but I think we can make it on 7. It's like, okay, then let's try this on for size, right? I want you to live for the next 6 months on 7 a month, see how it works. And you can't just all of a sudden flip the switch and, where are you going to pull $3,000 out of your budget every single month? That's a big number. Now, I mean, if you absolutely have to because of a scenario like this, well, that's a different discussion. But I mean, if it's I want to retire, then probably not a great scenario to plan for. So
yeah, well, and look, I mean, stuff's going to happen, life's going to happen, challenges are going to happen. So if it's you need to get something done, right? So I mean, what's a good time to get started? We could sit here and say, well, today, right? But I mean, be realistic about this. There's so many things after the age of 50. I think most of us, when you turn 50 and something happens in your brain and you start thinking, man, I'm getting old.
That's right.
This is catching up. I mean, I'm 53 now, and it's like I went from 50 to 53 like that.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, well, I'm only talking, 12 years.
Yeah.
Like 12 years is going to go by in a blink.
Yep.
So you start putting more effort into that stuff. And that's the point, because if you do that, then you do get to 58 or 60 or 62 and something unexpected happens.
Now you get more
you are better prepared.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's really the point, is the more prepared you are up front, if this happens, the easier it is. And I mean, you don't want to stress about it, right? It's not one of those things. Oh,
Sure.
I don't know if, it's not worth
You can't live
that.
your life in fear, right?
But it's worth having a plan to know what if, right? If it happens, this is what it looks like. So we've got a plan at least, because unfortunately, I mean, things happen. They don't always go as planned. And a client would know their own financial and employment scenario a little bit better. I mean, if your company's stable, there's
you
no
hope
concern.
anyway, right? You never know.
You never know for sure. I mean, recessions happen, downturns in the market and economies, and companies
get sold.
Companies get sold and they merge together. So I mean, there's all sorts of things that happen that you don't have control of. But
Well, that's the beauty though, Phil, because again, if you start working with a financial professional, you have some of this data, you're talking about yearly consultations, especially if you're talking like 53, 55, you start working with somebody, you start building a plan. Once a year, you're getting together, maybe a couple of times a year you're talking or whatever, and you're just taking the stress off so that if something does happen, yeah, it's going to suck, but you're able to pick up the phone and go, Phil, this happened. Where do we go? Right. So that's the point. I mean, that's like the biggest moment, I think, to me, of working with a professional, a financial advisor, is knowing you got someone to turn to and call who's familiar with the situation that can walk you through it. And maybe you're in better shape than you realized. I mean, back to our initial point.
And I've had clients in both scenarios, clients that have been a longer term client where we've already done the planning, for a later retirement. And then this happens. In fact, I'm working with one right now that works for one of the big three automakers, going through layoffs, and his card was pulled, so to speak. So we had already had that discussion 2 years ago when we set his plan up to retire. He was going to wait another couple of years, but hey, it still works. And he's comfortable with it. So at least the stress is off. He can kind of let it happen, work through the numbers, and then see, okay, yeah, do I want to stay retired, or do I want to go back and get a part-time job, do something fun? What do you want to do to fill that time or not? It's, at that point, it's up to you. On the other hand, I've had, a client that had attended a class, so they had already kind of seen some of the information and knew the process, but hadn't actually met with me yet. But all of a sudden they get a notice, and now it's a rush, right? Because they're like, okay, hey, I got this notice and I got to make a decision in 2 weeks of, whether I'm going to accept the buyout offer or am I going to not, and then hope that I don't get laid off anyways. So then it's a rush because now we're behind the 8 ball trying to run this math quickly and, do 2-3 meetings in this short window to give them the answers they need. So better off having done that ahead of time so okay, well, the groundwork's there. Now it's an easier adjustment to see, does this work now? So.
Well, and as the old saying goes, failure to plan on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine. However, advisors, they're here to help. They're going to want to help, but the longer the runway, the more they can help. Emergency situations, sometimes they're not going to have as much stuff to do. So get yourself off the duff. If you take anything from this podcast this week, it's just talk with somebody. Sit down, have a conversation, see where you stand if you haven't done so, in case something comes up, in case the unexpected happens. Again, 60% was kind of a wild number to see. A big number of people have to retire sooner than they planned. So don't be in that demographic, or if you are, at least be prepared. Reach out to a qualified professional like Phil, or find one in your area, whatever you need to do, but take some action for yourself. Of course, you can check the show note links this week to reach out to Phil and get on his calendar. We've got the number on the screen. We've got the website on the screen. It's philstaxhacks.com. Do something for yourself and your future, especially during the holiday season like we're in now. It's December. It gets busy. We put stuff off. Don't put this kind of thing off. You never know when it's going to happen. So thanks for hanging out. We always appreciate your time. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, and we'll catch you later here on Phil's Tax Hacks and other retirement facts. Thank you, buddy.
Take care.
Phil? Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.